Hello, this is Tracy Brooker with the Creative Outcomes podcast, a podcast all about unschooling, self-directed learning, education, and how to get those creative outcomes from that. Today with me, I'm really excited. I have Carl Rust, and Carl is an educator. And I just told him I'm just gonna hit record because I am so excited to hear what's going on with him. So Carl, tell us a little bit about yourself, which is a lot, and what you're doing right now and how you came about this unschooling self-directed learning. So please share.
Sure. Okay. So I was a classroom teacher and a building administrator in elementary school for 30 years. I was a classroom teacher for 17 years. I taught mostly sixth grade. I became assistant principal of the same building, and I did that for 7.5 years. And then I had an opportunity to start a alternative program for elementary kids. And at the time, I started doing some looking around at what was out there. And to tell you the truth, there wasn't a lot of alternative programs that seemed to be working very well. But I did find one in Indiana that seemed like it worked pretty well. And what they'd done was they had cut it down a lot on suspensions and expulsions and things like that. What they were doing was they opened a room in their building and they started kind of re-educating kids. I thought, oh, this is interesting.
Right.
With the idea that some kids may lack some skills. And so if we get them some skills, they'll be able to just jump right back in the classroom and be a success. And I thought, okay, great. So we kind of copied what they were doing. We started off, and I don't know what the percentage was, but for a lot of the kids what we worked with, it kind of worked. Right. They were in our room for a while, and the idea was 4 to 6 weeks, and you're back in class, and you're doing great. And it kind of worked for a few kids, but then we had some other kids that never left. Right. They liked the small class. They liked the one-on-one, the relationship building. And I trained my staff to build relationships. Nice. And be empathetic. And we also avoided power struggles. So the teachers would send work down, but if the kid didn't want to do the work, we didn't make a big deal out of that. So we found there were kids that weren't leaving, and I kept thinking, what's going on here? We're supposed to get them. And we called ourselves trainers with the idea of like a athletic trainer. Right. The job is to fix the athlete up, get him back in the game. And
love it.
So we were academic trainers. And then I started also at the same time working. A friend of mine was running a science program for homeschool kids at the local science center. And I had some kids I was working with, and I thought, well, maybe they might benefit from these classes. And so we started taking some kids over, and we had kids that were having a lot of behavior issues in conventional classrooms. But when we took them to the science center and it was a little more hands-on, a little more relaxed, suddenly the behaviors didn't seem to be happening as much. And I thought, well, that's interesting because...
Right. You caught that. That was observant. Yep.
So it meant that really the problem wasn't the kid, the problem was the environment.
Correct.
So what conventional schools do is they've kind of got a one-track or two-track mind. And if you can fit within a pretty narrow boundary, you're probably okay.
Right.
And you may even like it, you enjoy it, and it's fun. But then for anybody that's in the outlier areas whose learning style or behavior style, if you want to call it that, doesn't quite fit into the norm, then schools are like, we don't know what to do.
Right.
And not realizing that maybe if they did a few little changes, that things would be better. So in the course of that, I also ran into a parent of a homeschool kid that told me about, she said, I'm really looking for a democratic school. And I'm like, what the heck is a democratic school? Never heard of that. Although if I really had been paying attention in high school, I did read Summerhill in high school.
Oh,
and I just thought, wow, that's just, Yeah,
Wow.
it's just a weird.
Right.
It sounded cool and everything, but it just didn't seem real to me, I guess. And so she said, you should read Peter Gray's book, Free to Learn. And I'm like, okay. So I got it, read it. It was like, oh my gosh, this is what I've been trying to do for 30 years. I didn't even know I was trying to do it. And part of my struggles as a classroom teacher was I had my foot in two different worlds. Wasn't quite self-directed, but I wanted to be interesting and I wanted to be relevant and I wanted the kids to have fun and I wanted all these, but I was still trying to hang on to grades and you have to do this because it's good for you, for your future. You're going to need to know how to do algebra in your future, so you better pay attention to your homework. So
we don't know any better, as a teacher myself. Yeah, we don't know. We just know what we were trained to do, what we grew up with as well. Yes.
And I struggled and struggled for years and years because I didn't like grades, but I didn't know what to do about them.
Yeah.
I kept trying to invent all these new ways of doing assessments and grades. You run into the same brick wall all the time. It's like, no matter how you try to do it, it still comes down to, I'm trying to make a judgment on somebody else's work.
Yeah.
And how do I why is this an A and this is a C? And it seems so arbitrary sometimes. You had 5 paragraphs, so you get an A. You only had 4 paragraphs, so you get a B. Yeah. Even if they were the most wonderful 4 paragraphs ever written,
right?
Still wasn't 5. So anyway, I thought, okay. And I actually watched some documentaries and things and I don't even know if I can find this again, but there was a documentary from some foreign country where they had actually taken the, what we think is juvenile justice or the juvenile detention, and they'd made it democratic.
Oh.
And all of a sudden, these kids were it was like the miracle cure or something. And of course, this all sounds fantastic to people that haven't actually tried it.
Right.
And I thought, wow, I think we should do that. And somehow I talked my bosses. We were going to, the original idea with the program where we were kind of the trainers and my idea was we were going to expand that to every elementary school in our system, which we had 14 elementary schools.
Wow.
But of course, the best laid plans, when you're working in public schools, you find out that it's always hard to get a firm foothold.
Right.
So all of a sudden, sorry.
No worries.
We did expand to 5. But then we were kind of starting to stagnate a little bit. It's like, and so I said, what if we we'll close 2 of the rooms and we'll make a centralized program, but I want it to be self-directed. And my bosses were kind of like, self-directed, what is that? Is that kind of like Montessori? And I was like,
I know.
Kind of.
I know, yeah.
And they would say things like project-based learning, and I would, yeah, sure, project-based learning, that's what we're doing.
Been there, done that, yeah.
So they said, okay, but here's the condition. We have to see improvements in attendance, suspensions, expulsions, and police calls.
Wow.
And we have to see an improvement in testing. Test scores have to go, we have to see good test scores. And at the time, I was willing to agree to anything because I wanted to try it so bad. Right. So we did a little pilot program for 6 weeks, which was kind of a silly idea because we started off, and by week 6, we were just kind of starting to hit the stride. Right. That wasn't really long enough. But we found out that you can do it. But that 6 weeks really isn't long enough, but that it can work. So then we went to full-fledged the next year, and I actually ran that program for 2 years, and we were pretty much self-directed, except we had to do standardized testing. We were part of the public system, but we did no grades, we did no assignments, we did no compulsory classes. The only thing we asked kids to do, and it took a while to get them to do this, was we asked to have a meeting every morning. And that took a while to get to the point where they were really willing to sit down and actually probably it took us 4 months.
Why do you think that was?
Because I think what happens if you go from outside directed
Right.
to self-directed, like boom, the first reaction of the learner is, I'm free.
Right.
I'm going to run around and act crazy. And part of it too was, I think if you are fitting into a conventional system and somebody takes that away, the first thing you do is you still are compliant. And you still are trying to figure out, okay, what is it you want me to do?
Right.
But if you've been the rebels, which a lot of the kids that we had been the rebels, so they're still rebelling.
Right.
And I kept saying, what are you mad about? It used to be that somebody's telling you to do homework and we're not telling you that. So what is the deal? But they were they were playing a role and they were used to that role. And so we had and I think sometimes we call that deschooling. It takes a while. So if you suddenly decide at home that you're going to go from a conventional system and you're going to try unschooling, the first thing that may happen is, depending on the nature of your child, either they don't want to do anything, according to our viewpoint, they don't want to do anything, or they become obsessed with one thing and they don't want to do anything else.
That's correct.
And that's normal.
That's normal.
Kind of what happened to our kids.
It's just deconditioning. I mean, if we look at any kind of, for a better choice of words, people don't judge me, brainwashing, brain training. The brain is, in essence, a computer. It's trained just like Pavlov's dog, right? We're gonna keep feeding it, and after a certain amount of time, the results are certain behaviors, and now we're going to put them in a whole different environment. It's a little bit of shock, and I think you described it well. They're just trying to figure this out.
So what happened was, over time, at first I had a staff of 5 and we only had like 20 some kids. And at first we were all looking at each other like, what have we done? This is just insanity. And then it just seemed like there for a while was crazy, but then it seemed day after day, the chaos level just started to go down. And we started the morning meeting, I believe we started in November, where they actually were willing to sit down. For a while there, we couldn't even get them to sit down with us.
Yeah.
They would, we get a few of them, but most of them would just be like, no, I'm not. And by November, we started to get more and more kids interested in doing that. And by January, they were running the meeting. We started off with me running the meeting because I wanted to show them kind of how you do it.
Right.
But then it didn't take too long. And we had first graders through sixth graders.
Awesome.
And some of the younger kids were the first ones to step up and say, I want to run the meeting.
Well, and I think if I can share, I think it has to do with trust. There's a program, and I worked with them, Top 20 Training, great group of teachers. It's a social and emotional learning program. But the one teacher, so he's high school math, and basically he said it could take 3 weeks. He wouldn't teach math because he would do this program, like welcoming the kids in. Basically, he said, it took me 2 to 3 weeks to build trust.
Yeah.
So that they can genuinely see, wow, this guy cares about me. It's not about the math.
Yeah.
I mean, so when I think of it that way, even though, I mean, basically you're doing the same thing, but in essence, it's like, could you even imagine that as a child too? They had to get that trust from you to say, oh, wow, this is real, Yeah.
Yeah, they're really going to do this, and they're not going to. And so many of the kids we were working with were trauma kids.
Yeah.
And a lot of times what trauma kids do is, I'm going to be as rotten and as obnoxious as I can be to you because you're going to leave me anyway. So I might as well just get it over with.
Oof, Yeah.
But we kind of hung in there, and like I said, it started to be better. They started to build a sense of community. And we got to the end of the year, The frustrating thing about working with a public system is you don't always have control over who's coming in, the kids that are coming in. So we kept getting new kids, and it was okay to get new kids, but they kept sending us older new kids. And especially after the first of the year, I kept saying, don't give us any sixth graders because they wouldn't let us keep them. When they turned seventh grade age, they had to go to the middle school. And I kept saying, 3 or 4 months is not enough time for what we do.
Right.
And especially an older kid. So I kind of developed this rule, and I probably stole it from somebody. But I think for every year you've been in conventional school, it takes at least a month to kind of work out. So if you've been in public school for 6 years, it's at least going to take 6 months.
Correct.
And it depends how traumatized you are. It could take a year or 18 months.
Absolutely.
Before you've unpacked all those feelings from those situations that you've been in. So the interesting thing was, of course, you probably aren't surprised. Well, the other thing I did, and nobody told me to do this, I also surveyed everybody that came in. I asked them about their school experience. And then I did it a couple times a year.
Mm-hmm.
So when you started, midway through the year, and at the end of the year. And attitudes towards school changed.
Wow.
The kids, when they came to us, so rate your school experience from 1 to 10. I'm not sure what the average was, but coming from conventional systems, especially these kids, because they were the ones they were getting referred to the office, suspended, in trouble. Oops, didn't mean to do that. So their attitudes changed a lot. Attendance went way up. So we were like 93% present. And one thing I did was I counted suspension days, which weird in Indiana, the state I live in. If you're suspended, you're considered present because it seems weird, but that's how they do it because you're not really, it's not that your parent kept you home because you were sick. It's the school excluded you.
Okay, got it.
So you're considered present. But I said, that's ridiculous. Kids not present, if they're suspended, they're absent.
Right.
So when I went through and did attendance, I counted all the suspension days.
Okay.
And we improved, majorly improved in attendance. But the thing that really blew my mind was we also improved in test scores. And I'm like, why?
Right.
We improved in math and reading. And so it helped me start a theory. And I don't really know how to research this theory. So maybe somebody out there can think of a great research project. But I started to think, well, maybe the brain is like a muscle. And so our kids were having conversations all day long. They were talking to each other and adults and listening to adults talk to each other. They were playing video games and watching YouTube. And they were outside a lot on bikes, rollerblades, skateboards, and just outside doing things. And I thought, what if, and I think there's a lot of reasons to think this. What if instead of sitting kids down in rows and teaching them English or teaching them language, what if we let them use their language?
Yes.
And so the difference is, if I stand up in front of the class and try to teach you how to diagram a sentence, or you have something you want to accomplish, you want to talk your friend into playing Minecraft with you, but you have to convince them.
Correct.
You have to give them reasons.
Correct.
Which way are you really exercising? And I think we've seen some research that kids in class that are listening to lectures, their brain activity is not a whole lot.
Yeah.
But if I'm talking to my friend, my brain activity is a lot.
Absolutely. So I one of my favorite, because it's a current research, it's done a couple of years ago at UC Irvine, was the curiosity drives learning. And they stumbled upon it. They were doing MRIs and they went, hey, this could be used in schools. And basically, per the MRI, and what they found out is the brain lit up more and actually retained more information when they were curious about something. But then if curiosity was kind of generated somehow, it did the same thing versus rote material. And so the first thing I always think of when I hear that is, that's what self-directed learning is, right? We're just curious about something. Yeah.
Well, yeah, and a big fear amongst parents and other educators is, well, when are they going to learn their whatever, fill in the blank, their math, their addition, whatever.
Yeah.
So then I get to think about math because remember, we weren't doing any formal instruction other than there were a few times when a kid would come to us and say, I want to do some regular schoolwork. Okay, we'll do that. We'll sit down with you and do it. It never lasted very long, but so we had little snippets of that. And we had parents that demanded that their kid do such and so. And we always said, you know what? You can make any agreement you want with your child. We're not going to enforce it.
Wow.
So if you want them to do that, we'll help them and we'll be here for them if they want to do that. But we're not going to call you. And I also told my staff, we're not tattling on kids if they're not doing the program that they're supposed to do. That's between them and the parent.
Yeah.
So anyway, we improved in math and reading, and so
that's awesome.
My bosses let us continue, and we repeated the same results again the second year, and the ones that had been with us from the beginning did even better. We kept getting new kids in, and I kind of didn't always count them into the pool. But so then I wrote a book during that time period, and
which is
Get Out of the Way and Let Kids Learn.
Get Out of the Way and Let Kids Learn by Carl Russ.
How we can transform schools and reintroduce natural learning.
Love it.
And just from my experiences, but I started thinking about conventional schools because here I was in this little group and I had between 20 to 30 kids at a time. And I kept thinking, this is great. We're having a great time. I mean, we were doing all kinds of field trips. We were doing all kinds of wonderful stuff. But I said, what about those poor kids over there in the school that aren't fitting in and they're not happy? What are we doing about that? And so I thought, maybe if I write a book and explain some things that conventional schools they've just kind of become habits where we kind of know they don't work they certainly don't work for everybody. Mm-hmm. And I would argue that they don't work very well for anyone.
Yeah.
Even the ones that kind of seem like they're doing okay. Because the problem with those kids that are doing okay is they're either the kind of the middle of the road kid that just kind of muddles along, doesn't cause any trouble, but they really never find their passion or their things that they're interested in. And then you have kids. And the other thing we do that's really weird is we tend to group kids to say, here are the high kids, here are the middle kids, here are the low kids. And the thing is, if you look at each individual kid, they all have things they're high in.
Correct.
And they all have things that maybe they're not so good at.
Absolutely.
But even those so-called high kids, they tend to be the teacher pleaser, the school game player who knows what they need to do to fit in, get the A.
To get, yeah.
And then, but the problem with that system is, I could talk about this stuff for a long time, but when you introduce a rubric previous to giving the assignment. So one of the assignments I inherited, I'm teaching now, one of the assignments I inherited was a Martin Luther King essay. And it had to be 5 paragraphs long, and each paragraph was worth a certain number of points. So I had kids that already had turned it in and scored, and I had some kids that hadn't done it yet. But when you do that, if you say, write a Martin Luther King essay that's 5 paragraphs long, suddenly the gamer, the teacher pleaser, will write 5 paragraphs.
Correct.
Where they might have written 500 pages.
Right.
That's an exaggeration, but you see what I'm saying?
Well, I
is that
call
when
it,
I put a limit on it, yeah.
Yeah, it's almost like this, and I always would say it's this incredible coping mechanism because it is such of in the box type of an environment. And so, like you said, there are those kids who cope, right, in this conditioning because it's 24/7, right? Do this, do that. And they're like, they figure out the game. Like, I can cope. Like, I can cope really well. This could work for me. And then you have the middle, and then you have the other kids who are like, well, I'll get by. Like, I see the minimal. And that's their way of coping with it.
Yeah. So that's the conventional school. I identify 9 things that they do. So like children should be grouped by ages in grade levels. That's just a habit. There's no research that says that that's a good thing. All learners should learn the same thing at the same time. That's the convenience of adults. That's all it is.
Yep.
Because I want to know that on Tuesday I'm teaching a lesson on fractions, and it doesn't matter.
It's convenience.
It's convenience.
It's convenience. It's correct. No, I know teachers who do the same lessons for 20 years, and they will not break that.
No. Number 3, play is not as important as instruction and should be an extra. And that's absolutely upside down.
That's correct. There's enough research that proves that wrong. Absolutely.
Number 4, learners and their families should only be marginally involved in making decisions about how the school is run.
Yeah.
And so to me, it's the upside down pyramid. Well, I mean, it's the pyramid, and at the top is central administration, then building administration, then teachers, then kids and families, and it should be absolutely turned over.
Yep.
Kids and families should be top.
You know what I always say, Carl? This is one of my things, and I would just love to see the outcome. You know, in this idea of we're all taxpayers, right? Why can't we, just like you said, survey? Let's survey our kids at the end of every semester, right? Or so many times, even our kindergartners, and let's ask them, like, I'm paying taxes. I want to know, are you doing your job? I'm really curious what that would be like.
Well, and I'm going to talk about my current thing now, but the first thing I did was survey the kids.
Nice.
The first thing I do because, well, I don't want to get ahead of myself here.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Because I want to talk about all that.
Number 5, testing and grades are necessary and help adults determine what students already know and what they need to learn. And when you really get involved with testing and grades, you know that's absolutely not true.
That's correct.
Number 6, coercion and compliance leads to good citizenship and a peaceful life.
Yeah. Ouch. That's even a tough one to discuss for me because it's like, but it's the truth, right? Because then we can have a compliant society and everyone's, Which is the exact opposite of what's happening.
It's adult convenience again.
Yeah.
And one of the things I'm struggling with in my current situation is this, because sometimes it's way too noisy for my old ears.
Yeah.
And I just want them to be quiet for a while.
Yeah.
So, number 7, we need a school building with classrooms in order to maximize learning. And if you go all the way back to Ivan Illich back in 1970, Deschooling Society, he had some great ideas about what could a school be. It doesn't have to be a school building. It could be a factory. It could be an office. It could be the supermarket. There's lots of places that you can do learning.
Yep.
But he's talked about how we professionalize the teaching profession, and all of a sudden, your regular person says, "Well, I don't know how to teach. I'm not a teacher." Which, in the olden days, everybody was a teacher.
Right.
But now we're like, okay, that stuff happens over at the schoolhouse with the teachers. No learning can happen over here. It's all got to happen over there.
Yeah.
And that's a problem. Number 8, we need to supervise children in order to keep them safe. And number 9, the best way to learn is to sit and listen to a teacher talk. Yeah. And even if schools pay lip service to other things, if you go and sit in the classroom, if you could do it as an invisible, you have to stay for a while, because if you just go for a little bit, sometimes people will put on a dog and pony show for you. But if you wait long enough, you'll see what's really going on.
Yeah.
So those are the 9 things, and so I have a chapter about each one. I talk about how I grew up, and when I was younger, and this is still true today, maybe not as much, but my family were all readers. We played board games together. I played in the neighborhood with the neighborhood kids. We were doing a lot of things that some kids don't get to do these days.
Right.
And I had great role models for not just academic stuff, but for just life. I used to sit and listen to the adults talk.
Right.
Whenever the adults got together, I thought it was really cool to just sit there and listen to them talk. And they would involve me. I mean, we played games together. But so I got some doses of self-direction outside of school. Inside school was a different matter. Although when I got a little older, I was kind of self-directed, especially in high school. I was the game player, although I never worried about being the straight A student, but I figured out how I could get away with stuff without getting in trouble. So I wasn't really in trouble, but I was kind of in a way, I was a delinquent because I was figuring out ways to subvert the system.
Right. That's pretty funny.
So I would skip homeroom class, so I'd be on the absence list, and then I would skip the classes I didn't want to go to. And in those days, they had handwritten absence excuses, so I would just go in and change the dates on my absence slips. And if I felt like going to the class the next day, I would take my little absence slip in. And so anyway, the book is aimed at conventional schools. So at the end of each chapter, I just have 2 or 3 things they could try.
Right.
Something you could do.
In their classroom, even. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's what really just separates you from I have all my other speakers, teachers, but you're in it, you've done it. Not only that, being an administrator, there's that perspective there. It isn't just playing teacher. Nope, I did it. This is what happened. And then, now we have the now, which please share. What are you doing right now?
Okay, so I was doing some substitute teaching last fall. And I one day assignment in a classroom in the building that I spent 25 years in. But all the kids that I knew had grown up and they were already gone. But I substituted in this class I felt so bad for them at the time because they had a teacher at the beginning of the year and he left after 5 weeks to go to another school system. And they had never found anybody to take his place permanently. And part of the reason was because these kids, some of them are a little obnoxious and a little rowdy, a little loud. I got through the day. I mean, it wasn't perfect by any means, but I thought, this isn't so bad. I've seen way worse than this.
Right.
And I think so in this particular grade level, they're doing, there's 3 teachers and they do a 3-way rotation. So they have a reading teacher, math teacher, and the other group had kind of morphed depending on who was hanging out in that room, but kind of drifted into social studies and writing. And I was thinking, even at the time, and the kids in every rotation, some of them would say, "Can you come back tomorrow? Can you be our teacher?" And I'm like, "No, I got some other things I would need to do." Because one thing I do with a group of kids is I found over the years that if they're loud, rowdy, and obnoxious, especially when they don't know you, it doesn't do any good to get loud.
That's correct.
And obnoxious yourself, which is the fallback that a lot of adults go to because that's what they've seen other people do. So I tend to just be really low key and really quiet. And I try to just, try to figure out what does this person need right now, try to do that. And especially in a 1-day assignment, it's not going to make that much difference. So we had work to do, and we kind of did it, but I let them work in groups. I let them work with their friends. And so that went by, and I was doing other things. And then in January, I got a call from the principal, And she said, I've been subbing in this class because we just can't find anybody that can handle them. They're just kind of out of control. And we had a class meeting the other day, and they asked if you could come back and be their teacher. And I'm like,
Wow.
after one day, they may not know what they're asking for, really. And I thought about it, and I thought, you know what? I've been kind of looking for a chance to try some stuff. And one of the things, there's another book out there called Disrupting Class, which is about, kind of takes the economic theory of disruption and applies it to education. And the economic theory of disruption is you can have a monolithic monopoly on a certain aspect of industry or business, and all of a sudden you can have a little upstart or a couple little upstarts come along, and all of a sudden it flips. And it's because the upstarts will service an underserved population, and they're very innovative. And so example would be in the 50s, IBM was the computers was IBM. And there was another company, I think, but there was just these massive computers that filled rooms. And then you had Microsoft and Apple come along, and they were basically, especially Apple, was serving kids as toys, kind of. But they were very innovative, and they weren't afraid to change and adapt. And all of a sudden, boom, IBM's on the bottom and Apple's on top. Yeah. So their idea with education is we've got a monolithic monopoly system that's not innovative, and there's an underserved population. So this group of sixth graders is another underserved population because they're just, they've got enough kids that are rebelling and obnoxious that people don't want to stay.
Yeah.
And so I said, you know what, if you want me to be the teacher, and she was saying, come in a couple days a week, whatever you want to do. And I said, you know, if I'm going to be the teacher, then I'm going to be the teacher full time, and I'm going to stay till the end of the year.
Now, I want to share with people, this was right when you and I met prior to, and I'm going to really say this. So Carl, the look on his face, because he just told them, okay, I'm going to do it. And now Carl's looking at me in the camera, but I will share. There was a part you were almost like, you were so like looking past, like I could just see it. I was like, he's either deep in thought or he's asking himself, what did I just do? Okay, yeah. Now tell us what happened.
So I've been 16 days. Today was the 16th day. And it's not easy, I have to say that. And that's what I say about self-directed education all the time. I never want to make it sound like it's easy. It's not easy. But I wanted to see, and part of the reason I started subbing was I wanted to see what can I do in a conventional system. How far can I go? How far can I push it? Right. So it's kind of a mixed bag. And the other thing I want to back up just for a minute and say, the other thing I think we make a mistake as adults sometimes is we think we have to figure it all out ourselves.
Yeah.
And then we're going to deliver the results to the kids.
I would do the same thing. So, yeah.
So what I've since learned, and I've told a lot of people, because a lot of people ask me, well, what if this happens? And what if that happens? And I say, my answer almost always is take it to the community and find out what do we need to do. Now, one thing I used to talk about in my other program was, and it's kind of that deschooling thing in a way, but for some kids, you have to work with them a little bit to get them to the starting line. Some kids aren't even at the starting line. Some kids are already there. And so I've got 74 kids I'm working with. So I would say out of those 74 kids, there's probably maybe a dozen or 13 or 14, 15 that are kind of already at the starting line. They understand what I'm talking about. They get it. They're doing stuff. And then you have kids that varying degrees of not understanding what I'm even saying. So I came in, I said, first of all, I'm not going to tell you what to do all the time. I'm not going to fuss with you about your iPads, because one of the big conflicts in school today is they've given kids all this technology, and then they try to enforce silly rules about what they can and cannot do with it. And kids are real good at getting around these rules. So I said, I'm not going to fuss with you, but if I'm talking or somebody else is talking, then the iPads are face down. Other than that, and I don't really want to hear them. If I'm walking around the room, I don't want to hear music. I don't want to hear. So you got headphones or you turn the volume down. Those are really my two rules. I don't police the iPads. I also, I don't really give assignments. Well, all kinds of possibilities and invitations. We used to talk at the other program about invitations, adventures, and what was the third one? I can't remember the third one, but it was like, there's not an assignment.
Now, did they help you set up the rules? Like when I think of, yeah, they did. So how did that go? Like when you had that conversation?
It's a struggle because for a lot of them, they're saying things that they think adults want them to say.
Yeah.
So one thing that we've got going in my area, and I don't know how far spread it is, but a thing called PRIDE. It's an acronym. And see if I can remember all the, so persistence, responsibility, initiative, dependability, and I can't remember what the E is right now. But so, and they know that that's kind of been ingrained. So we started talking about, okay, what should our norms be? How are we going to treat each other? And one group started down that road where it was just like, well, we got to have persistence. Well, what does that mean?
Yeah.
And then they can rattle off what
they knew you'd want to hear that.
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, persistence is a good one. So I don't think we're not really real in that area yet. I think we need to come back to that in a while. So we did set some norms. I have asked them to journal every day, but journaling is any kind of self-expression. One of the early things I did was, because I think another thing we do that's fairly ridiculous in school is we say that we call things reading, writing, math, science, social studies, which is really silly. Instead of saying there are lots of ways that you can take information in, and there's lots of ways you can output it. So I talked to them early on about inputs and outputs. And I say outputs include talking, singing, dancing. It includes writing. That's included. Video, all these things, because schools tend to pretend like everything's reading and writing. And they even make science and social studies reading and writing. And the math's the only one, they kind of make it reading and writing because you read the problem and you write it down on your paper. And they seem like they've left out the whole other realm, all these other realms. So when the kids at the academy that I ran were riding bikes up and down the ramps and skateboards, they're living geometry.
Yes.
They're not learning about geometry, they're doing it.
That's correct.
So I decided that we were going to do social studies. We weren't going to. So I will present some things.
Right.
We did Black History Month videos and we've done things like that, but never with an assignment attached to it. Just like, here's some information that you may want to know. So we started community service where they go to other classes in the building and help with the younger kids. And they love that.
Yes.
And we started a school newspaper.
Nice.
We just published our first issue today.
There's your writing.
There's the writing, but it's like trying to move away from the idea that social studies is in a book.
Yeah.
Social studies is what we do, how we treat each other and how we interact with each other. And there's lots of things that they've crammed into the so-called social studies. They've crammed all this stuff into it. But really, if you take that literally, social studies, you're studying how we interact with each other.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm doing now. There's a building expectation supposedly by the principal that you put points in every week, and you have to do grades. You have to do a grade, a midterm grade, and a final grade.
Every week?
You have to put points in every week, but you have to send
okay.
a grade report home halfway through and at the end. And so early on, I said to the kids, I don't like grades. I don't think they do anybody any good, but we have to do it. So what do you think we should do? They had some ideas about that. But what I kind of came up with was, since I've got to put points in the computer, I'll make things worth points. But you either did it and you got the points, or you didn't do it. But the thing that they're really not used to is I don't penalize anybody because they didn't do something.
Right.
And so I had to try to make that work because I've got a computerized grading system. I'm like, oh my gosh, how am I going to make this work? So I had to exclude every assignment from the final grade because it automatically made it either 10 out of 10 is A plus, or if I didn't put anything in, it was nothing. It wouldn't let me just, put some points in.
Right.
So then after we'd done a little bit of work, we added up the points. I sat down with kids that were interested in talking about it, and I said, okay, here's how many points you have. Here's kind of an idea of what the range of points is. What do you think your grade should be? And so they would say something, and I would make a little note. And then I came up with a scale, and I presented it. First I said, this is a can't think of the word right now, but this is proposed. This isn't done. But here's what I was thinking. So 50 points is a C. And I said, I'm not giving anybody an F. There's no way. Because I'm not going to label anybody a failure. I don't think any of you are failures. And I'm not giving Fs.
Yep.
And I don't really want to give any Ds. And I didn't. So we calculated the points that they'd earned, including stuff that happened before I arrived. So I adapted that in. And that's part of the reason I'm struggling, because there was stuff already in there. So no matter what I did, it had to blend in with what was already, except I went back and excluded all those too. So we have this range of points, and then I just said, okay, what do you think? And then I presented it to each rotation. I said, here's what we're looking at. What do you think? And every rotation, we tweaked it just a little bit. When I sat down, then I put in a grade in the computer, a midterm grade, which I just pushed a letter grade. And so what we did was the lowest points that anybody got were like 22 points, and the highest was like 200 and something. And so I just made that a C minus, and that was an A. Nobody got an A plus. I mean, an A plus really, I said a C is going to be easy, and A plus is going to be difficult. The fourth grading period, I may totally change that, but I was trying to adapt it to what they already had. And the kids they're pretty okay with it.
That's good.
One of the things I can do is when I click on a kid, I can see all their grades in all their classes. And I tell you, the grading thing is it's a total mess. Because, and part of it is even in the class I was teaching, so they had a Martin Luther King essay, that was a real thing. It was worth 30 points. And some kid had gotten like 3 points. And I'm like, how does this happen? How do you give a kid 3 points out of 30?
Right.
And if you're going to count that as penalizing them, because in a conventional grading system, that's total disaster. I mean, the next worst thing is not turning anything in at all.
But that's always, I mean, I've taught high school, pretty much birth through 12, right? And my last course I taught, this is what I told the kids. I said, listen, because there were some kids like, it was ASL. I don't want to sign on camera, whatever. And I said, okay, well, how about, because it was online school, how about you and I meet, through the virtual school setting, and we'll do it together. You'll still get full points. Because I told the kids up front, listen, the gist about this class is that you learn a language. I would rather, to me, it doesn't make sense that you're stressed out to get the points when the goal of the class is that you're supposed to be learning a language. So how about I'll do the sentence and you do it either with me or after. And you still, because there were just those couple kids and they had anxiety and it worked. And then I would do things like, okay, because they would get 10 points. If you want to substitute, because the kids liked when I signed a song, they thought it was hilarious. You can, if you want to sign a song, we'll drop one of your quizzes. Because they would rather do that than do one of their quizzes.
Well, that's a great example. And those opportunities come along all the time. And I think one thing I learned somewhere along the line, even before I learned more about being self-directed, for kids to be self-directed, was how do we get to yes?
Yeah.
So when a kid asks you something, I early in my career, I found myself saying no a lot. No, you can't do this. No, you can't do that. I go home and I think, why am I saying no all the time? Why can't I say yes? What's going to happen? Is the sky going to fall in? Well, I had a situation today which could have been a disaster. Class is going to art class. We have a special at the end of the day, every day. They're going to art class. One kid sitting just like this. And I said, what's going on? I'm having a bad day. I'm not going to art. I'm just going to sit here. And I could have been the authoritarian.
Right.
You're going to art. You have to. Everybody's going. You're going to go. But I've just been down that road enough that I know what's at the end of the road.
Yeah.
And there's nothing good that's going to come out of that. He's going to hate me. He's going to hate art. He's going to hate the school.
Right.
And so I said, oh, okay. And I just left him. And see, there's something else I do that you're not supposed to do. You're not supposed to leave one kid alone in a classroom.
Yeah.
And I'm like, he's in there by himself. I suppose he could tear the room up if he wanted to, but he's showing no indication he's going to do any of that. So can't I just go about what I'm doing? And I'll just keep coming back and checking with him every so often. And I think when you do things like that, and I'm not trying to toot my own horn, but I've just learned a lot from 30 years. When you do things like that, you're kind of putting some money in the account, the relationship account. You're putting a little bit of money in there. And they know that, okay, he's not going to jump all over me just because I don't want to go to art. But there's little opportunities like that throughout. And that's what I'm kind of thinking and doing.
Well, you have to be aware. You have to just, you have to, my thought is, in the end, what does it get you? I had a similar situation. I was subbing and we had a behavior modification program, right? And so usually it's, go to the principal's office. And I went, I'm not going to do that. So I said, hey, why don't you hang with me for lunch? And I could tell there was fear there. And so we're there at lunch, her and I in the classroom, and we're talking. And I found out things about this little girl that I never knew. And one of the things that she goes, my dad just died of a heart attack. And I went, I'm so sorry. And that was kind of one of my first awakenings, going, goodness gracious, if we just did this instead of send them to the principal. You know? It's just so wrong. And these kids at the early age, they know these behaviors. I don't care. This is my opinion. And I've had people argue with me because, of course, they still believe we have to have control in the classroom, but at the cost of a child's self-esteem. And you can call it a positive behavior modification program, but you ask any little kid, they're like, I hate that program. It makes me feel bad. Tell me what's positive about that. You know? Yeah. Anyways, that's my little rant.
Yeah, and so that's just that. And so there's little opportunities.
Yeah.
And even when I was subbing in some other classrooms, I was thinking about things like that. Like, if I go in as a substitute teacher and the kids don't know me, and there's say you're supposed to copy the spelling words or something like that, and I can say to the class, this is what we're supposed to be doing. And a lot of the compliant kids will immediately do it.
Right.
And then you have kids that don't do it. And so what's the big deal? I mean, I guess so as a substitute teacher, I thought, I'm really going to be in a position that I can just kind of let that go. And now as the so-called classroom teacher, the only thing I have to balance out, and I haven't quite figured out how to do this yet, so I'm almost a buffer between the regular school and my class. So I have to be thinking, and I'm kind of talking to them a little bit about, if other adults come in here, they may not see things the way I see them. So you've got to be, and I think part of the, the sixth grade experience in our community is you're getting ready to go to another setting.
Right. So they're considered the older kids in the school as well. Yep.
And just life, part of life is navigating situations. So you go into a room, you kind of size it up and you go, okay, I can kind of see what my expectations here are. And maybe I'll just leave because I don't like it. But if there's something in that situation that I want, I'm going to figure out what's going on and how am I supposed to act, especially at the beginning. And then if you establish yourself, you may be able to push it a little bit. So 16 days in, I'm developing relationships with kids. I'm trying to blur some of the traditional boundaries as far as you have to do this, you have to do this, you have to do this. But I'm also trying to make the kids realize that they've got to be aware. So a big challenge after 16 days is my wife's having surgery on Tuesday, so I'm not going to be there next week.
Yeah, that'll be a challenge.
And I've kind of talked to them a lot, prepared them, and I'm trying to think of how to.
Interesting.
So
yeah.
It's, I mean, as opposed to if schools were set up the way we would set them up, or there are a number of self-directed, democratic, free schools, agile learning centers. They're out there. And I just think that the case of one staff member being out for a couple of days isn't a big deal there. And it really wouldn't be a big deal in conventional school if we just arrange things a little differently. But since I'm trying to kind of walk the tightrope between what I know is good for kids and what the expectations of the building are.
And then you have a sub coming in who's going to, right?
Well, it could be the principal, which is a mixed blessing in a way, because the kids know her. She's got a relationship. I mean, she's a nice person. Kids have a relationship. But her and I don't actually see totally eye to eye, surprise, surprise, on what kids should be doing. We had a little meeting the other day, and she read out standards and rubrics and things like that, and I just kind of didn't say much. But anyway, the interesting thing about being in the middle of a conventional building is you do kind of have to be aware this is a little bit of an island. And I've got to be, one day we were having a lot of trouble because, there's a sub shortage across the nation. And so we had one of the sixth grade teachers was out, and sometimes what they do is they split that class between the other two. And so all of a sudden I had 37 instead of 25. And that's a whole different You
Well,
know,
have you asked the kids?
yeah, after we went through it, I asked them what we should do differently, but
And what was their response? I'm curious.
they had a lot of good ideas. Um, and I think some of them had already occurred to me. One thing that I think we made a mistake, and again, I'm trying to fit in, right? I'm trying to kind of fit in, but be different at the same time, which maybe is impossible. I may decide by the end of the year that what I'm doing is not going to work.
Well,
But what they said was we should just do some fun activities, play some games. And I thought, that's kind of what I was thinking. Instead of trying to run class
correct.
normally, and then try to also include the math teachers stuff, I should think ahead. I haven't done this yet. And have a plan. Well, I came up with some ideas, and I thought, you know what? It would be we're in like a circle because there's fifth and sixth grade classrooms kind of in a circle. There's a middle part, and I thought if one teacher was out, and there's 6 classes that have teachers, the other 5 could much easily absorb that class. And so I wrote up a little thing and I sent it to the principal. And I said, what if instead of trying to run class, we just did like a club day where each room would have a different activity and you could choose 4, you could choose 3, and we'll mix the kids up by grades. But see, some of this is still so far out to people. So
Yeah.
I'm doing the community service, which so far is been successful. We've had a little bit of shakiness because I didn't plan it very well. And the school newspaper is a huge hit. I mean,
That's
it's
awesome.
just, but I'm trying again. The other thing I think we forget about sometimes when we talk about self-direction is the same kind of rules apply to the adults too. So if I'm trying to influence a building of adults, I've got to approach them the same way we approach a new group of kids. It's
my gosh, that's so funny. Well, I was going to ask you, that was going to be one of my questions is how are at least your team, your other 6th grade team, because you do have to work with them. You're getting their students, right? How is that going?
It's going pretty well. I think it's improved because I think maybe they're at the beginning. They were again thinking we got this crazy old guy here that's just letting the kids run wild. And the more that I've been there and done things with kids, I think they're starting to at least be interested.
Good.
One thing we talk about is you can't really teach anybody until you have their consent. And that's, again, I think we forget that with adults all the time.
Yeah.
Because we get teachers together for this so-called professional development, but we never ask their consent.
Oof. You should make that into a billboard or something.
Yeah. And adults are the same way. So nobody's given me the opportunity, but I would love to sit down with a group of teachers and say, what do you think you do really well? And what kind of things are you doing with kids that are just seem to be really working really well? Kids love it. You love it. I'd love to do this as a building administrator. That would even be better.
Professional development, right?
What do you hate? What is it about your day that you just can't stand? It's just, and what if I give you permission right now to do more of the first thing and either get rid of the second thing or do way less of it? And I don't know that they would do it, but I think teachers are very scared right now.
Yeah.
They're scared of lots of things. They're scared of test scores.
I will share where I'm at right now in Arizona. So it's the whole budget. And they're saying, if they don't pass the budget in the next few weeks, the state, literally the public schools, this does not include charter or private, they're going to have to cut the school year because they don't have the money to pay.
Yeah.
And so the whole conversation, it is on the TV 24/7, is how are we going to bridge the gap?
Yeah.
you know?
Well, and so that's an example of what the guy talks about in Disrupting Class, is that there's the system, the way it is pretty it's unwieldy and it's unworkable, and it's got all kinds of flaws to it, and it's expensive. Natural learning, what I call natural learning, you could call self-directed learning, you could call lots of things, is actually a lot less expensive to run, because you don't really need first of all, you don't need a school building, you don't need classrooms. You always are going to need caring adults that have the best interests of children. But I would say we need to totally revamp teacher prep, because a teaching license right now does not mean that you're qualified to work with kids, in my opinion. Just a teaching license in itself does not mean you're qualified.
Yeah.
There are people that don't have degrees that are way better at working with kids. And I know the union would take me out and shoot me for saying that. Nothing against the union.
Well, but the union, again, was formed around a compulsory system. It has nothing to do with, yeah.
So helping a younger person, and I like to say younger people and older people. I'm an older people, and the younger people, we're all people.
Yep.
And the other thing I like to talk about, I haven't really talked to this group of kids yet, is, well, I did a little bit. I consider myself a co-learner. I mean, they refer to me as the teacher, and that's fine, because that's what the role that I'm playing is. But I'm actually a co-learner, and they're co-learners. And I told them one of the first days I was there, I don't know everything. I'm learning just like you are. You know things I don't know, and I probably know things you don't know, but that doesn't make me a higher rank than you.
That's correct.
So,
and when in doubt, YouTube. At least that's what my son always says. Mom,
Sure.
You can learn anything off of YouTube. And I'm like, you're right. Yeah, but it's the truth. I mean, and I want to just acknowledge you, because I think, number one, it takes courage, and you are so truthful and honest with the kids, which again builds trust. And it must be even more difficult for them, because they have to battle that trust issue when they go home. I mean, I grew up in inner city. Same thing, that school becomes our almost safety place. We were better at school than we are at home. But yeah, and they're with you for 6 to 7 hours throughout the day. It's a whole different, I mean, I can only imagine. Well, there's so many questions, and I'm begging you to come back when you're done with the school year, because I want to know what happened. How did it turn out? Knowing that there's 6th graders, even I'm curious to know, here they've been presented this wonderful opportunity that they should have all the time, and they don't. And now they're going to a middle school. But who you are being for them in this moment, Carl, and I say this with my whole heart, is something they don't forget. I mean, I have 2 students. The one student reached out to me just to say hi, and you're the best teacher. Just thank you for listening to me. I was only there for, so many months. And sometimes it just takes, right, that one moment in time. And for you being that individual in their lives, you and I both know they won't forget it. There will be a time maybe they'll be parents one day, and they're going to go, wait, I remember that teacher, and man, he did that. And do I want to send my kids to this? Like, maybe the thought of education and how the possibility it could be might stick with them enough to later down the road, they too will question. I always say, we've all done it. We've been in compulsory education. and we've all said, I hate school. And we knew we hated it because there was something that just wasn't right about it. We couldn't define it. Like, yeah, we knew there was this authoritarian thing going on, but it just wasn't right. And you've given this opportunity to these kids. You know what I mean? Like, maybe it's not so bad if things just change a little bit.
Well, that's what I'm hoping. And so
that's the co-partnership.
The parents and the other people in the school will stop and think, maybe we can do things a little differently. Actually, I've got at least one kid in one of the rotations that's the son of a girl that I had in class years ago. And I just wrote a letter to the parents because I sent home those grade reports and wanted to explain kind of what we do, that I provide a lot of opportunities, but I don't require people to do the same thing at the same time. And then, so we had to come up with a different way of doing grades, because if you're doing that, you can't do conventional.
Did any parents come back at you, or?
Well, I just sent it today, and just the girl that was in my class, and she was thanking me for. She feels like I'll be a good person to be around her son. And that she thanked me for trying to make teaching she called it authentic teaching.
Wow.
And again, it's like, I appreciate that emotion, but it's not really what I'm trying to do, but I appreciate what she's saying. I had a little girl write in her journal today about how awesome I am. But see, and what I'm hoping I get around to is, it's not the point of how awesome I am.
Correct.
It's how awesome they are.
Yep.
And that was kind of a barrier before, because I used to go into classrooms and model for other teachers what you can do. And they would say, oh, that was just great, but I can't, you're so wonderful, I wouldn't be able to do that. And so that's why we need to shift the spotlight off of the sage on the stage.
Yeah.
It's not about somebody being so wonderful. It's about getting, like my book says, get out of the way. Sometimes it's just getting out of the way.
Well, I am the whole thing with journaling, and one of the things that even my own sons is, what did you learn today? What'd you fail at? I mean, because if you failed, that's great. Did you get anything? Like, failure's not bad. Did you learn anything? If not, it's okay too. Say, nope, nothing. It's okay. We put judgments on, I don't know, on everything. But I wanted the journal, like you said, it was just about them. Not about, I'm going to read your journal and you're going, I just wanted them to be able just to express whatever it is that's going on with them. Yeah. No sentence prompts is what they call it.
Well, yeah. And again, for right now, a lot of that is somewhat superficial. I've had some pretty amazing revelations in those journals, but a lot of it is just, I put a question on the board because sometimes they want that, so I'm doing that for now, but I also keep telling you, the journaling eventually I'm hoping is yours.
Yeah.
That you want to do it and it means something to you, instead of just, I've got to get 10
got to get this done. Right. Yeah.
So I'm hoping that the other thing that will be really interesting, I haven't actually compiled my first survey. Just glancing through it, I've got two things in mind, and I changed it from what I used to do a little bit. But I had two things in mind. One is, can I see where their attitudes have changed? And can I also see, so I ask a few questions about, what have you learned this year? What do you like to do outside school? Things like that, just to see how those answers change. And that's more of a subjective thing, but so I don't know. I know from past experience what's happened before, but I don't know. But a lot of them rated this year so far pretty low.
Wow, yeah.
1s and 2s and 3s.
Yeah. Because of what they started with.
Part of because they just had all these different adults coming in and out of their and some of the adults that have been in there haven't been very I don't know.
Right. If you could offer advice to some teachers or even parents listening, I mean, you're in a rare situation, but there's a teacher who might be listening going, I want to do this in my classroom, or I don't know. Can you just give me 1 or 2 things, words of advice? And then you're like one of your I think you mentioned the Peter Gray book, but I always like to end if like there's a book that you feel might offer. So give me some advice, especially as a teacher.
Well, I think if you, as a teacher, if you're interested in being a little bit more self-directed, I would say one thing that's really struck me lately as being important is look at your grading practices and see how you could maybe do something different there. The other thing would be as much choice as you could possibly can have. And I think if you always offer an option of if you give some choices, like you can do a diorama or you can do a report, or what do you think? And maybe that's the most important thing, I think, is just if you have a question, bring it to the group.
Yeah.
And part of the thing is we think sometimes in school that the curriculum is the math and the science and the reading and the social studies. And really the real curriculum is how do we treat each other? And how do we want to be treated, and what can we do together? And
that's a beautiful way to end right there, Carl. I have to tell you, I love it. Now, books. Your favorite book. It could be 2, 3.
Okay, so let me tell you the one that actually inspired me to go into teaching in the first place. I did a lot of things out of college. I was a theater major my first time at college, and then I went into the newspaper business. I was in the insurance business. I worked for my family company in collectibles, and none of that seemed very meaningful to me. And I read a book by Herb Cole called 36 Children. And Herb Cole is an author I don't think you hear about much, but he was actually a social worker in New York City that did transition to teaching and was assigned to a school in Harlem that had 36 black kids in his class, and he was a white guy. And quickly found out that, the idea that he was going to teach the traditional curriculum wasn't going to work. And so he just scrapped all that and they were writing stories and notebooks, and they were doing all these things. And all the stuff he did with this group, I thought, that's what I want to do.
Wow.
I want to be that kind of teacher. So he's written a couple books that are really great. And I don't know if he ever really got on the self-directed bandwagon, but he's very much work with the kids that you have.
Yeah.
I guess Peter Gray is the obvious one to me. There's a lot of books by Greenberg from Sudbury Valley.
Yep.
A.S. Neal, of course.
Yeah, that's one of mine.
I think that Disrupting Class is a very interesting book to read. So there are a lot of them.
Well, I have to tell you, I cannot wait. So when's your last day? Because I'll give you a couple weeks to chill.
It's May. I think it's May 25th, whatever the Friday is there in May.
So my goal is that we have you back in June.
Okay.
Because I think a lot of our listeners, I know I'm going to have a lot of questions. What happened? How was the response? Yeah, because now we have a good vision of what's happening 2 weeks in. And again, I want to remind people, like, Carl's doing the work, like, you're doing it in the custom. Now, I noticed, and I want to mention this because I wasn't aware of the group until you told me, unschoolingschools.org, correct?
I think so, yeah. It might be .com, unschoolingschool.com.
And what is that group you want to share with?
It's a group of educators, and we kind of met during the pandemic. We seemed to be on a lot of the same video calls with each other, and we have the same feeling. Well, because part of the self-directed movement is to create schools, private schools or whatever. And we kept thinking, yeah, that's great. We love that because it's very self-directed and very nice for those kids. But there's millions of kids in public school that may not even have one close to them or may not be able to afford to go, but they're going to public school every day. So Unschooling School team says public schools belong to the public. Taxpayers pay the bills. Parents and families have every right to go into the school and say, this is what I want, and how are you going to provide it? And we know that right now, that may, depending on where you are and who the principal is, you may not get a very good reception. But if we get thousands of people doing this and millions of people in a school of 500 kids, if there were 100 parents that said, yes, no, we want this, our kid is not going to sit in class all day and just listen. If they want to go to the gym, they're going to go, or if they want to go outside. If we get enough people in a building, then what we're going to say to that building administrator is, we need to have a self-directed room.
Yeah.
And then we need a self-directed wing. And then maybe the whole school.
Yeah.
But parents and kids, especially kids, you have a lot of power. You just don't realize it. Kids one of the things I've done with the classes where I've only been in a day or two is, if you could change anything about your school, what would you change? And now let's think about how we can ask for that.
Wow.
And just because you ask, and I tell them, just because you ask doesn't mean it's going to be a yes. But I guess this is what I was trying to get at earlier. The curriculum is everything that we do, every decision we make, every word we speak. And so for kids to be involved in decision making, they need to learn that. They need to learn, I can petition my government for redress.
Yes.
And in their case, the government, pretty much totalitarian, is the school. I can petition.
Right.
I can
do
ask.
this? Right. And if I don't know how to do this, then let's find out how to make it work. And
if you go to unschoolingschool.com, we have all kinds of tools, all kinds of suggestions. We have what we call enlightened educators, who are people that kind of know there's something going on and I'm going to try to do some cool stuff. And then we have what we call responsible subversives, which is kind of what I'm doing, where I'm trying to work the system a little bit and get away with things. And so this could be educators, parents, community members, kids. Kids can go in their school and say, we want something different.
Yes.
And the school may say, no, no, no. But we know from history, if you keep asking, maybe they will say yes. Or maybe you'll hit the right person at the right time. And they'll say, let's talk about this. And even if we can just get a conversation going, why do we have to be, especially kids
yes
that are,
or no? Why do we have
kids that are 4 to 7? Why do they have to be in grade levels? What are we gaining? Or 4 to 6, or whatever you want to do. K1. Why do we have to have K1? Why can't we have littles?
Yeah, right. Yeah.
We mix them all up. Just asking a bunch of questions, and why can't we do this, and what can we do?
Well, and it's a life skill. They're just life skills. We were having this conversation yesterday. Why in special ed are we having a life skill class when every kid should have a life skill class? I mean, why does it have to be special ed? Well, because they have to learn to function. Well, so do the rest of the kids. I'm confused on that. So, well, Carl, I cannot thank you enough. It's very moving. Like I said, you're in there, you're doing the work, and I look forward to our chat in June. Now, how can people, if you want them to get a hold of you, reach out, find your book, how can they get a hold of you?
Probably the easiest way is if you go to the unschoolingschool.com, there's a contact us page, and I'm listed there, and we're available as a team to, I mean, depending on the geography, come to you in person or by virtually. We will even attend, if you want us to come in as an advocate for your child, we will come in to a conference. I've done that in person before.
Awesome.
Haven't done it virtually yet. Or we can talk to a staff, or we can talk to an individual teacher, or we can just talk to a parent. I've talked to many parents about trying to help them figure out how they can get more for their kid that they want. But that contact page has all of us listed and kind of where we're located.
And I'll make sure on my website, tracybrooker.com, that I have all of your information on there as well. So I'll put unschooling schools. And I mean, I cannot thank you enough. This has been awesome. I look forward to June. And thank you for coming on.
So let me mention a couple other things real quick.
Please do.
I am working on a fictional story about a 5th grade class that experiments with democracy, and I'm posting that online right now. I've got 4 parts up, and I'm also writing a book about what I'm doing now and what I've done since last August, which is still a manuscript. But I will send you the link to the fiction story.
Perfect.
And I will also send you the link. My book's on Amazon. It's probably on a lot of other places. Or if they want to contact me directly, the email is fine. But reach out to me. I'll be happy to help anybody. And I'm not trying to make a ton of money, so I'm not really looking for big speaking fees or anything. I'm just trying to talk to people.
Yeah. Well, especially when it comes to self-directed learning in general. And, in essence, the goal would be to change the system that we're in. And somebody's got to do it, right?
Yeah.
So if not you, then who?
Right.
So thank you, Carl.
Yeah.
And thank you, everyone, for listening. Again, you could get all this information on my website. You'll see his podcast. It's always at the top there. All of his information will be there. And thanks again. So take care. Thanks for listening to the Creative Outcomes podcast. And if you'd like to learn more, go to my website at tracybrooker.com.